Sometimes life doesn't go the way you planned it to go. Friend of mine, Sam Helly, he and I worked as chaplains at the medical school for a number of years together. And one day Sam told me a story of when he served as a missionary in South America. He said, I was there preaching at a special event. They had put up a tent out kind of in some pasture land, and it was some kind of evangelistic series, and I was the preacher. Now, when you grow up, as I did, in tropical countries, you learn that there are critters there that you don't see a lot of times here in this country. Well, Sam discovered that night. He said, I was in the middle of giving this impassioned sermon about Jesus when all of a sudden I felt something start to crawl up my leg. Now, I don't know if that would freak you out. That would freak me out. I don't know what I would do up front, though. When you're in front of all these people, it's like, okay, what do I do? So Sam said, I'm inside, I'm panicking, I'm trying to, this is not supposed to go this way. I'm trying to preach about Jesus, but I can feel this thing slowly coming up my leg. So he said, I'm preaching about Jesus, so I decided I would just tell him. Jesus walked everywhere he went. He walked here, he walked there, he went to Judea, he went to Galilee, and he said, it just keeps coming up my leg. My night says I'm freaking out, so I think it's headed right toward, anyway, it's coming up. And he said, so as it gets further up under my thigh, I put my hand in my pocket. And he said, I'm starting to sweat, thinking, what is this thing? It's going to bite me. He said, I waited till it got high enough, and I just grabbed it and squished it. And he said there was this horrible odor in this spot on my pants. Yeah, that's enough to put me off food for a day. I have thought about that over the years, thinking, I've had a lot of things happen over the years. Anytime you're up front often, especially over a period of quite a few years, things happen. And you think, this is not the way this is supposed to go. So how do you respond in that moment? I still don't know how I would respond if something started crawling. If you see me start strutting around the stage like this, just say, take a break, get rid of it, whatever it is. But sometimes what happens to us is not funny. In fact, not only is it not funny, it's profoundly painful. Professor of leadership down at Fuller Seminary, my alma mater, Scott Cormode, talks about the realities of our lives in terms of longings and losses. We all have longings, yearnings, dreams of how our life is supposed to turn out. It might be in something as simple as Sam's meeting, how the program is going to go, how the sermon is going to turn out. Or it might be something in life itself. We have deep longings, deep yearnings. But on the other hand, we have losses. Times and ways in which life takes a turn. It goes in a direction that was not planned. And the disappointment can be profound and disabling. Longings and losses. Or you might think of them in terms of dreams and disappointments. Over the years here at Loma Linda, I've been honored to be a part of people's lives at times enough to realize that while you don't recognize it on Sabbath morning, we often have a veneer, a cover. We shower, we shave, we put on aftershave, put on perfume, whatever we come. We look good. It looks like everything is put together, and yet inside there may be something profoundly disheartening. Seems like it kind of groups itself in certain categories around here. Academics is one. It could be that your dream came to a crushing stop when you had opened an email that simply said, we regret to inform you. Just those words were enough to bring your dream crashing to a stop. Or it might be in a doctor's office, when a kind doctor is also clear, I'm very sorry to tell you, but the test confirmed my worst suspicions. It could even be in a counselor's office or a pastor's office, where a marriage unravels as the truth comes out. It might even be sitting across one another at the coffee shop when she looks at you and says, you're really a great guy. But, and there it is. the dream ends. A number of years ago, I was privileged to speak at an event where there were a number of preachers, one of whom was a very well-known Presbyterian preacher and teacher of homiletics, Leslie Holmes. We were sitting talking as the event was about to begin, and he said something to me that I haven't forgotten. He said, "I've learned over the years to preach to broken hearts because there's one in every pew." So we adapt that for Anthem and say, preach to broken hearts because there's one in every row. Disappointment. Life hasn't gone the right direction, and now you're grieving. Well, we're in a series, the second of a 4-part series about living the real life, living the good life, those kinds of things, and yet the reality is life doesn't turn out the way we often want it to. That may be evident nowhere better than in the life of the Old Testament character Joseph. Joseph is privileged. I don't know how else to put it. He's the favored father of his son, of his dad. His father is wealthy. His father prefers him in what he does. He gifts him in ways that Joseph does not deserve. He's one of 12, but he's standing out. So Joseph has things going well for him. But that's not the way it turns out in the end. Because Joseph's life begins to spin downward. It starts with the sideways, the side-eye glances of his brothers with their jest and then their mockery. It leads to the fact that when he shows up, they capture him, they hold him, they kidnap him, they abuse him. They finally end up selling him off to some Ishmaelite traders on their way to Egypt. And today the curtain rises on Joseph's story when Joseph stands on the slave auction block in Egypt. Genesis 39 records what happens. It starts in verse 1 saying, "Now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt. Potiphar, an Egyptian who was one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him there." I want you to just ponder and think about what that one verse, just simply describing his descent into Egypt, tells you about Joseph. He's been captured by people. I know there were sibling rivalry, there were tensions, but still they were his brothers. Captured by them, sold off by them. Manacled, shackled, taken as a prisoner to Egypt, stood up on the auction block. Here's the next one to sell. And Potiphar notices him. Potiphar purchases him. And now he's going to Potiphar's house. How far he's fallen. The dream has died. It's become a nightmare. His world has collapsed. It's that kind of a moment in your life when everything unravels and you say, I don't know where to turn. I don't know what to do next. I don't know how this will turn out. All you know is that it's crushing the life out of you. I can see in my mind's eye, I can see her today, even though it's been 2 or 3 decades ago. I can see her seated in the chair in my office, sliding further and further down in that chair, her body racked with sobs. Her husband, whom she loved, had just been in the next chair, had just stormed out of the office. He said, I'm done. I don't want any more of your tears. I'm through. There's someone else, and I'm not coming home. I just sat there brokenhearted for her. What do you say in a moment like that? What do you do in a moment like that? When the dream has died. That's Joseph. The dream has died. He's in Egypt. As the crow flies, especially today with modern day travel, it's not that far. It may as well have been another universe for Joseph. One author puts it this way: there are 3 realities, he says, we have to admit. The first one is that when you're in that kind of suffering, you're in Egypt, at least ancient Egypt as a metaphor. When you're in that kind of suffering, you're in Egypt. Secondly, he says, the second reality you have to admit is that between where you are in Egypt and where home is, or where the fulfillment of your dream is, between the two lies a vast wilderness. And the third thing he says we have to admit is the only way home is through that wilderness. And it's that wilderness that frightens us. It's a wilderness of grief, of tears, of sorrow, of disappointment. Now, Joseph is a unique figure in Scripture, particularly in the Old Testament. I mean, the Old Testament is as abrupt and as clear and as graphic as you could possibly get. Just telling the story of these women and men, their ups and downs, their flaws, their failures, just the wretched realities of who we can become as human beings. It's like Anthony Campolo, the great sociologist and preacher, once said, he said, look, if you're going to go to hell anyway, you may as well go with some degree of dignity. So if you're going to sin big. Well, that's the Old Testament. And that's the kind of character we become accustomed to meeting until we hit Joseph. Other than the fact that he seems to have been early on a spoiled brat, the favored one of his father, it's hard to find a flaw. You know the old saying that the cream rises? Well, notice what happens when Joseph gets to Potiphar's house. Verse 2, the Lord was with Joseph so that he prospered. And he lived in the house of his Egyptian master. When his master saw that the Lord was with him and that the Lord gave him success in everything he did, Joseph found favor in his eyes and became his attendant. Potiphar put him in charge of his household, and he entrusted to his care everything he owned. From the time he put him in charge of his household and of all that he owned, the Lord blessed the household of the Egyptian because of Joseph. The blessing of the Lord was over everything Potiphar had, both in the house and in the field. So Potiphar left everything he had in Joseph's care with Joseph in charge. He did not concern himself with anything except the food he ate. Joseph has the Midas touch. Seems that everything he touches prospers, turns to gold. In fact, this new master he has, Potiphar, must have looked at him with wonder and awe. Thought, this guy's unbelievable. Look at how he prospers, how he succeeds. The narrator in the story is telling us the reason for that. Potiphar likely didn't know for sure. Here's this man who prospers. And slowly but surely, Potiphar turns everything over to Joseph's care. Puts him in charge of everything. Which leads Joseph directly into one of the greatest challenges of his life. The fact that he has all power and the fact that he's in control, and apparently, from the text, the fact that he's good looking, well-built, handsome, puts him in a very delicate situation. So, we pick up the story again, verse 6b. Now Joseph was well-built and handsome. Now pause there a moment, because his mother Rachel, also described as being very beautiful, the Hebrew term that was used to describe her striking appearance is the same Hebrew term used to describe Joseph's striking appearance. So both mother and son are striking in appearance. The way the narrator says it, he was well-built and handsome. And after a while, his master's wife took notice of Joseph and said, "Come to bed with me." I guess that's the direct approach. But he refused. With me in charge, he told her, my master does not concern himself with anything in the house. Everything he owns has been entrusted to my care. No one is greater in this house than I am. My master has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. How then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God? And though she spoke to Joseph day after day, he refused to go to bed with her or even be with her. The tension mounts as she pursues him. He's in an incredibly delicate situation. He, as a slave in a foreign land, he in the household of someone as powerful as Potiphar, he in the household of someone whose boss, whose master's wife is now pursuing him, is just a handbreadth away from certain death. And she won't relent. Verse 11, one day he went into the house to attend to his duties, and none of the household servants was inside. She caught him by his cloak and said, "Come to bed with me." But he left his cloak in her hand and ran out of the house. When she saw that he had left his cloak in her hand and had run out of the house, she called her household servants. "Look," she said to them, "this Hebrew," which in this case, the wording used here is describing him as a despicable person. "This Hebrew has been brought here to make sport of us. He came in here to sleep with me, but I screamed. When he heard me scream for help, he left his cloak beside me and ran out of the house." She kept his cloak beside her until his master came home. Then she told him this story: "That Hebrew slave you brought us came to me to make sport of me. But as soon as I screamed for help, he left his cloak beside me and ran out of the house." When his master heard the story, his wife told him, saying, "This is how your slave treated me." He burned with anger. Joseph's master took him and put him in prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. Think about how the story unfolds. Everything goes downhill until he finally lands in Potiphar's house. Then slowly but surely, his fortunes seem to turn. As his master places trust in him, as his master empowers him further and further, places more and more under his control, and he is able now to do things at his own volition. Things seem to be turning. The cream seems to be rising. He no doubt begins to have some kind of hope. Maybe my life won't be an utter catastrophe here in Egypt. I can almost sense in the story that Joseph begins to hope. The late Lewis Smedes was professor of ethics down at Fuller Seminary. Wrote this: "For the first decade of our marriage, my wife Doris and I hoped passionately for a child. I think we wanted a child more than we wanted anything else in the world. So we hoped and prayed for 10 long years, and then finally, after 10 years, Doris became pregnant. We thanked God and drank a toast to hope. One night, about 6 months into the pregnancy, something went wrong, and I called the doctor. He told me Doris was going into labor and to get her into the car and take her to the emergency room right away. I'll meet you there, he said." Imagine this. "Oh, yes, and I have one more thing to tell you. I should have told you before. Your baby is going to be seriously malformed." Malformed? Seriously? How seriously? Very seriously. It's up to you now to tell Doris on the way to the hospital. Well, I told her. But we decided that we were not going to give up hope. No matter what the doctor said, we were not going to give up hope. So we kept on hoping all through the night. At 6 o'clock in the morning, the doctor came to me with a somewhat embarrassed grin from ear to ear. He said, "Congratulations. You have a perfect baby boy. Come and see." I went with him. And there he was, yelling his head off. He looked just like me, a perfect man-child. Praise God, we thought. It's true. Never give up hope. Never, ever give up hope. But 2 days later, our baby was dead. Hope can break your heart. sometimes life does not go the way we hope. Sometimes there are those moments when we think maybe it's turning. Maybe it will be better. I spent 7.5 years as a hospital chaplain. The units I primarily covered were neurosurgery, intensive care, general surgery, trauma intensive care, neurosurgery, and 2 oncology units. If you want to talk about life at its raw places, wander onto those units. I'll tell you the kind of effect it had on me. The kind of effect it had on me was that when Anita and I first married and we moved to Southern California, we ended up going with some friends down to Hollywood and going to a taping of The Price is Right. We got in line, the producer, director, whoever it was, just asked each person a question. We went in and we sat down, and the third person called was Anita Roberts. Up front at that time, it was Bob Barker. I'm whistling, she's up there, and she makes a bid, she wins it, she's up on stage, kissing Barker on the cheek, and I'm like, hey. And then she wins. She wins a whole number of things, including a pair of Honda Rebel motorcycles. But I worked on neurosurgery intensive care. She had a dear friend who had died on a motorcycle 2 years before. And we sold the motorcycles and bought living room furniture. And you say, come on. Too many times when I saw hope die. Joseph, I wonder, was he thinking, okay, things are getting better. I'm in better shape. I'm in a better place. Maybe there are possibilities up ahead. Possibly good things will happen. And then suddenly the master's wife, the boss's wife, starts making eyes at him. When you're in Joseph's position, you know your place. And you know that those kinds of looks mean 2 things. 1, she doesn't have good intentions. And 2, that could mean death, immediate death for me. And he's caught in that trap. Do you want to know what many of us are asking at that point in time? We're asking, God, where are you? Where are you? My life has been out of control already, destroyed. My family is gone. I have no future. And finally, when a few plants of hope begin to peek through the dirt and green shoots are seen on them, suddenly somebody walks by and tramples them under their feet. God, where are you? Have you left me on my own? So we just keep watching Joseph. I mentioned it already. Joseph is one of those few. Daniel is another one. One of those few characters, especially in the Old Testament, whom we look at and we say, wow, there's a person of sterling character, of integrity. Well, integrity hasn't gotten him anywhere good. So where's God in the midst of all of this? Now, there is a very curious interlude. I'm going to say it's going to be a parenthetical aside in our conversation this morning, but it's in the heart of the text. Here's what I'm talking about. Genesis chapter 37 all the way to Genesis chapter 50. That's the story of Joseph. 14 chapters of the story of Joseph, a story that I love, except for Genesis 38. Right there, when the story of Joseph is moving forward, picking up momentum, suddenly, boom, here's this interlude with a whole different story. And you wonder, why in the world is that there? And especially, after all, what that story is. It's the story of Judah. Judah and Tamar. Real briefly, Judah, an older, maybe much older brother to Joseph, sees this woman that he likes. She's not part of the family, not part of the people of God. He says, she's the one for me. To make a very long, complicated, and R-rated story very short, what happens is that Judah ends up through a whole train of circumstances without realizing it, sleeping with his daughter-in-law, getting her pregnant. He doesn't realize that's who it is. But that's what happens. At the end of it, Judah himself almost loses his life over what happens. And you say, what in the world? Here you have Joseph, and stuck right in here is Judah. There couldn't be a bigger difference in the integrity level of the two. Now, if you want to capture the full significance of Joseph's story, you have to go all the way over here to the end, to chapter 50, when Joseph will, at a key moment with his brothers, say to them, look, you all had nothing in mind but evil for me, but God used it for good. Now that's a pretty powerful lesson in the life of someone who stood with integrity. You say, okay, so God uses that kind of person, even the difficult losses, the bad circumstances of their life, to bring things to a good end. Here's what's curious. These two stories have some ties that bind them together in curious ways, but in opposite ways. Because this man, Judah, and his daughter-in-law, the mother of two of his children, Tamar. If you follow that story much further, all the way down to the Gospel of Matthew and to the genealogy of Jesus, you find Tamar, one of 4 women listed in the genealogy of Jesus, which is the writer's way of saying, even in the midst of that, if you follow it far enough, God brings something good from it. That's what's curious to me, because the writer of Genesis gives all of us hope. He says, if you're a person of integrity, you stand for something, God will use you and do great things through your life. If you have utterly blown it, God can use it and bring good things from your life. In fact, the words of Old Testament scholar John Walton, in the context of the discussion of the book of Genesis and its purpose, the integrity of Joseph is not a major point the author pursues at any length. What he's saying is the author is not telling us this story primarily to talk to us about the integrity of Joseph. The narrative of Genesis 39 fits in the larger scheme of portraying how God, in his sovereignty, brings his plans to fruition through what appear to be the most devastating of circumstances. So what Walton is saying is this story of Joseph and all its losses is about what God is doing. So what does he mean? Read you the last verses of that story there in Genesis 39. I'm going to start last part of verse 20. But while Joseph was there in prison, the Lord was with him, and he showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. So the warden put Joseph in charge of all those held in the prison, and he was made responsible for all that was done there. The warden paid no attention to anything under Joseph's care, because the Lord was with Joseph and gave him success in whatever he did. Here is what this chapter has to say about God in Joseph's life when everything had fallen apart. Read the chapter this afternoon. At least 4 times, and one could argue maybe 5 or 6, the narrator makes the statement, the Lord was with Joseph, the Lord was with Joseph, the Lord was with Joseph, the Lord was with Joseph. In other words, when Joseph's life was circling the drain, when there seemed to be no hope left, when every dream had become a nightmare, when his future was a catastrophe, the narrator keeps writing, the Lord was with Joseph. Over and over again. And he ultimately will be so close to him and work so directly in his life that Joseph himself will be able to look back and with the retrospective of history say to his brothers, you meant it to me for evil. You were trying to do me in. You were trying to destroy me. Every thought you had toward me was negative. But God used it for good, for the salvation of many. I love the story from the journalist David Haidu. Journalist David Haidu, one night, years ago, was sitting in a jazz bar in New York City. He was sitting listening to the playing of the eminent jazz trumpeter, Wynton Marsalis. He said that night there in that jazz bar, as Marsalis played, he said it was as though that trumpet wailed and wept and dripped with emotion. We were caught up in the notes, the jazz tunes that would set us off kilter and then wind their way around slowly but surely, finally coming to resolution. It was a magical evening, he said. And then Marsalis began to play, I don't stand a ghost of a chance with you. And he said that weeping, wailing trumpet just pulled us in. We followed it through the trails of the harmonies and the disjunctures of jazz until he finally came down to those last notes that we knew would end up resolving the tension. We knew those notes. I don't stand a ghost of a chance. And right there, before the final two notes, final two words, somebody's cell phone went off. One of those stupid little ditties all over the place. The man was horrified, grabbed his phone, trying to turn it off, was so humiliated, he exited the bar and went out. Haidu says, we were just furious. I could feel it in the other patrons. I'd been writing a story on this. I looked down at my notepad and just in large letters, all caps, I wrote, magic ruined. So angry. And then he said, Marsalis picked up the ditty from the cell phone and played it. And then played it again in a different way. And then played it further. And he said, suddenly we realized something magical was happening. He played that ditty in different ways as that trumpet wailed and wept its way around to those final two words, with you. He said the place exploded in applause. You know what? You who felt your dream die this week, you who sense a loss pressing in on you, you who want to write over your life right now, magic ruined. The Lord is with you. The Lord is with you. And if you think Wynton Marsalis is good, baby, you ain't seen nothing yet. Just wait till God gets a hold of that stupid little ditty and weaves it into a masterpiece in your life. And he will. Because the simple reality is this. Even when your dream feels like a nightmare, the Lord is with you. And he continues play.